LLC number 1 welcomes you to this summary for the April Newsmaker Breakfast titled Putin's War of Choice, Impact on Utah's Energy Prices. We are LLC number 1, the Popcorn Professionals, and this is our team, Cameron, Andrew, myself, Lexi, and Thomas. Every one of us attended the virtual event and contributed to this slideshow. And the panel for discussion is first Natalie. Natalie serves as an associate dean in the David Achilles School of Business and director of the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah. She also serves as the chief economist for the Salt Lake Chamber. Next was Tom Carter, is Governor Spencer J. Cox's energy advisor and the executive director of the Governor's Office of Energy Development. Next was Tom Holst. He's a senior energy analyst at the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah. Next was Stephen Bannister, director and chair, Master of Science in International Affairs and Global Enterprise Economics Department of the University of Utah. And last was Nicholas Thoreau. Nicholas Thoreau is the communications director of the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute. First topic discussed was how and why Utah cannot yet be an energy independent state. Natalie rose the questions, would it be beneficial for Utah to become energy independent from the other states in the world? Tom Carter agreed that of course it would be, but it is not realistic nor feasible right now. So 100,000 barrels a day come into the basin and 80,000 come to the refineries. 100,000 barrels a day and 20,000 get shipped out of the state. He informed the panel that the oil produced in Utah cannot be utilized for pump gas. Much of Utah's revenue is due to the export of this oil. Taking a look at the oil producers by state, we can see that the largest producer of oil is Texas, followed by North Dakota and New Mexico. Utah would have to be able to create the necessary infrastructure. Aside from this, Utah cannot fill the number of jobs required for oil production and export as it is. Briefly, this slide was presented to simply show the effects which war and major economic events, such as the mortgage crisis, have on impact on crude oil prices. On this slide, the team reviewed the pertinent topics which were discussed. First was the cost of vehicles. It's more expensive to own a truck, which requires much more gas. Most people living in very rural areas require a truck to complete various farm activities and or just travel in many rural areas. These people do not have access to the public transit systems that we do in Salt Lake City. So while prices increase, these people will suffer more than those who have access to public transit. Second, government revenue is tricky. The panel discussed if tax relief would actually help. The revenue from these taxes goes towards the Utah Department of Transportation. So they need this money in order to fix our roads, etc. Next, we discussed electric vehicles, and the conclusion from the panel here was that electric vehicles are not affordable yet, and the grid infrastructure is not yet there. Lastly, in this area, it was discussed that 70% of federally owned lands are prevented from extracting this oil due to environmental protection and other practical issues. Lastly, again, the idea of what would happen if pump prices went down. Currently, people's energy use has not decreased even with the high costs. So would lowering these costs cause too much demand on the system? This was a question and place of discussion. Again, federally owned lands prevent mining and oil extraction in 70% of the state. Oil production is maxed out by infrastructure and worker availability, so no supply relief even with the permits that exist. Lastly, the panel answered questions that were sent in. Is the impact of rising oil prices more significant on those located in rural areas where cars are more dependent on? What if those cars are used for worker labor? Can gasoline be provided to workers at reduced rates? The answer in discussion was the impact will definitely be larger on those located in remote areas. There are some transit options available, but it highly depends on location and availability or ability. Those located in rural communities often own large trucks, which are inefficient and require more gasoline than a typical vehicle. The current infrastructure does not support a transition to EVs or universally accessible public transportation. Second question was, is electrification going to help Utahns much if electricity prices are related to natural gas prices and those prices keep going up? Electrification will definitely be useful in the future, but currently is not supported by US infrastructure and resources. Socioeconomically disadvantaged people will have a harder time accessing EVs, and maintaining US roadways would be very difficult without taxes on regular combustion vehicles. Lastly, these are some questions we would like to, sorry about that. These are some questions that we had that we wanted to get answered, but were never discussed, unfortunately. So some of the questions we had were nuclear is a proven clean and sustainable power source. Is there any incentive to get a company to build a nuclear power plant in Utah to help Utah's electric grid become less dependent on market rates of fossil fuels like coal and natural gas? As natural gas becomes more expensive, are there any incentives for companies to capture more of the flared natural gas out in the Uinta Basin? Does expensive natural gas mean that the Delta Utah plant will keep part of its coal base for electricity generation for reliability reasons? Since EVs currently have a much lower energy to volume ratio than gasoline, should funding be put into research optimal batteries for EVs? Where could this funding be displaced from? Could the research and implementation of heat pumps eventually phase out natural gas heating? How could this be incentivized? And lastly, these are some questions that we'd like to open up for discussion on. Thank you.